Chapter 8, Fathers and Sons Disclaimer. No, I haven't won the biggest lottery in history, so I haven't bought Harry Potter. The evening gradually drew to a close. The gathered Death Eaters were escorted to the troll-sized fireplaces and sent on their way. Severus glanced down, feeling a tug on his rope. The house elf gestured for him to follow. Severus was escorted to Lord Voldemort's office. The small, scaled being held the door open for Severus, then closed it behind him. A delicious-smelling cream tea waited on a floating tray. Severus assumed the food was for him, since the Dark Lord never ate and only rarely drank since his resurrection. "Help yourself, Severus," Voldemort said absently, sifting through a pile of documents. Severus obediently poured himself some tea, ignoring the food for now. Under the distraction of sugaring his tea, he tipped a minuscule amount of a special powder into the cup. The powder would neutralize most potions, and reacted visibly with those it couldn't. The tea remained unchanged. Sipping his tea, Severus noted the incongruity of Muggle file folders and sheets of white, crisp Muggle paper mixed in with scrolls and scraps of wizarding parchment. The boy's files, both Muggle and magical, Voldemort explained. "No need to clarify which boy." "That is interesting, my lord," Severus said, his tone politely attentive. He was a barely adequate student, and suffered frequent absences because of poor health. Something in Voldemort's tone made his skin crawl. Danger rode the air. His spectacles were provided by charitable program thanks to the recommendation of one of his teachers, a Miss Kelly, the Dark Lord said, opening one of the folders. She also filed several petitions with the Child Welfare Department on Harry's behalf, none of which were ever addressed. She cites evidence of neglect and possible physical abuse. She appears quite dedicated. I wonder why her pleas went unanswered? Voldemort's gaze turned to Severus. Severus forced himself to take a deep breath, trying to quiet the anger churning in his stomach. I hired a Muggle investigator to examine the Dursley family. After spending the summer observing them, he also concluded that nephew was a victim of abuse. When he was not doing chores, including gardening, cleaning, and cooking, he was locked in his room. The man frequently observed him being bullied and beaten by his uncle and his cousin, one Dudley Dursley. Voldemort's red eyes bored into his. Severus was nearly shaking in fury. "My son? Those filthy Muggles harmed my son." "Your son, Severus?" Voldemort murmured, one corner of his mouth quirked triumphantly. "When were you planning on sharing this? Such reticence makes me question your loyalty." Severus surged to his feet and flung the delicate cup to floor. Voldemort looked surprised as tea and shards of china sprayed the hem of his robes. "My loyalty? I came to you, father," he spat venomously, "to share the results of the heritage potion, only to be obliterated before I could even speak. Because of your arrogance and scheming, my son was raised by Muggles who hated him, even near blinded by pain and frustration every time I saw him. Thanks to your obliviation, it was obvious he was undersized and strangely skittish for a Gryffindor." He sucked air through his clenched teeth, feeling grimly satisfied at the shocked look on the Dark Lord's face. "I went to Dumbledore, of course. There is nowhere else, Severus. He told me, not even the wards of Hogwarts compare to the blood protection. His safety is more important than his happiness. I was only his professor, not even his head of house. I had no standing or grounds on which to protest." Severus fixed his gaze on the cheery fire in the small hearth, regaining his composure. "My son, your precious heir, knows more of the duties of a house elf than of his own heritage. You stole my son from me, you Akama." Severus struggled for words, finally giving up with a sharp gesture. "I have duties I must attend." He turned sharply on his heel. "Forgive me," a soft voice murmured behind him. Severus whirled to face him. "Mea culpa, my son. You are right. I can offer nothing to replace the years I have cost you and Harry. But he is here now, with us. I will do all in my power to assure his safety and his happiness." Severus swallowed and nodded jerkily. "Forgive my outburst, my lord," he said dully. "I see I will have to re-earn your trust." "I cannot blame you for that," Voldemort sighed. "Go, Severus. See to Harry. He will have endless questions, now that his introduction is over." "I'll leave them to you." Severus bowed and strode from the room. Voldemort hissed a few soft words to the house elf guarding the door. The mutated creature bobbed a bow and scampered down the hall, Severus following. They took a long, winding route through the castle. "No Death Eaters will look for the heir so far from the Dark Lord's immediate vicinity," and I expect this place has alternative routes for its lord, he thought. The house elf stopped before a blank stretch of wall in a dingy, poorly lit hallway. It hissed a few words in snake language, and a door blurred into existence. "What Thea, let me go, you slimy piece of snake shit, a broken bar, a broken bar high, Professor." Harry's enraged shouts dwindled. The boy looked sheepish. "Give me a second." As soon as the damn door's gone, you there. Harry lifted and wiggled each foot in turn. Every time the stupid door finally appears, I get either frozen or glued to the floor. The boy was wearing a long green nightshirt. The jewelry and robe he had worn that evening were tossed in a careless pile in a comfortable-looking chair. "Care to have a seat?" Severus nodded and seated himself at the small table. He tried to lift the teapot to pour himself a cup, but found it immovable. "Yeah, annoying, isn't it?" "Voldy did that after I threw it at him." The boy tapped the pot with his cup, and tea leapt from the spout, filling the cup. Severus followed suit, studying Harry closely. The boy's shadowed eyes and trembling hands belied his chipper attitude. He sipped his tea, recognizing a blend intended to promote restful sleep. "Harry, please tell me what has happened." He kept his voice soothing, hoping to augment the tea's calming effects. "Well, Voldemort came to my aunt's house. He was polyjuiced to look like a regular guy. I guess he told Aunt Petunia he had car trouble. She told me to help him with his car. When I was coming down the stairs, his eyes changed from brown to red. I figured it was somebody magically disguised, so I ran for my wand. He petrified me and threw Hedwig out the window." "Is she okay, sir?" "Your owl is fine, Harry. She is currently being pampered by Hagrid, thank Merlin." Anyways, Severus winced internally at the terrible grammar. "He brought me back here and bathed me in really hot water. It smelled strange, sort of spicy." Harry reddened, obviously uncomfortable remembering the incident. "He dressed me in a weird silk robe, and carried me down some stairs. I counted almost 500 steps, but it was a while before I thought to start counting. There was this big pond full of water. The water turned into snakes, if that makes sense. It was creepy." He said something about a broken bar and blood and voice, I think. "Then he threw me in. I thought I was drowning, a broken bar, and I woke up in here." Severus nodded attentively, sifting through the somewhat garbled recitation. Harry fidgeted restlessly, and finally said, "Sir, what's going to happen? Are you going to take me back to Hogwarts?" His voice was small and hopeful, without the brave Gryffindor front. Severus was again struck by how small Harry was. "I can't, Harry, not yet," he said gently, hating to watch the boy's face fall. "Has the Dark Lord explained what being the heir of Slytherin means?" he asked, hoping to distract the boy. "Not really, except he needed an heir to become Lord Slytherin, a broken bar, whatever that means," he said, sounding grumpy. "In part, it means that he is obligated to protect you. Should he knowingly harm you, or allow you to be harmed, then the magical force that has acknowledged him as Lord Slytherin would retaliate. Also, failure to properly guard and raise his heir would be spitting in the face of his heritage, which he holds sacred," Severus explained. Harry looked relieved. "However," Severus added, holding up a finger for emphasis, "I would strongly recommend you avoid provoking him. No more throwing of teapots or other crockery, or anything else, for that matter." A familiar mutinous expression crossed the boy's face. "Harry, this is important. If you continue to defy him, he may choose to keep you here rather than permitting your return to Hogwarts." "You think he'll let me go back to school?" The boy's voice was full of longing. "I think it is a strong possibility." Severus actually had no idea of the Dark Lord's thoughts on the matter, but he had to offer the boy some crumb. "He has had me doing my summer work," Harry said thoughtfully, "and he got me some extra books." Severus spotted the study area, well-stocked bookshelf and a large desk. He rose and walked to the desk, Harry following closely behind him, like a lonely puppy. Reaching for a book, he spotted a corner of parchment peeking from a closed drawer. Acting on instinct, he opened the drawer. It was full-wadded parchment. "What are you doing?" Harry's voice was slightly panicked. He grabbed at the sheet of parchment Severus was opening. Only Severus' superior height and reach allowed him to evade the boy's seeker-fast reflexes. He frowned. The page appeared to be full on nothing but random squiggles and curls. "Potter, what is this?" he asked sternly. The boy's defiance deflated, and he looked deeply shamed. "It's Parseltongue, sir," he whispered, staring at the floor. "Parseltongue, eh? he murmured. The characters did look quite serpentine, he realized. I did not realize it was a written language as well as a spoken one. I didn't mean to, sir. After the rite, I couldn't speak anything but Parseltongue for 3 days. I started my homework, and it was all in Parseltongue too. I didn't realize it until I could speak English again. I didn't. A broken bar. It's just a broken bar. I'm sorry. Harry trailed off, scrubbing at his face. Hastily, not feeling capable of dealing with tears, he said, "It's a gift, Harry, not a cause for shame." Severus debated on offering the boy a hug, but settled for a brief pat on the shoulder. Hermione said that it's a mark of a dark wizard, Harry whispered. Miss Granger puts too much faith in books. Common wisdom, which is rarely actually wise. He says that Parseltongue is a dark gift. Serpents, magical and mundania, are no more inherently evil than any other group of creatures. Harry looked somewhat hardened, so Severus decided to let the matter lie for the moment. I have a few biographies of the Slytherin family you may find interesting. Voldemort left me a few. I didn't really know how far I could trust them, though. Very wise, despite what Miss Granger thinks. The written word is not sacred. Severus examined the volumes. This one is quite good. I have a copy myself, he said, laying Who's Who of House Slytherin to one side. An unabridged history of the ancient line of Slytherin. A broken bar. Rubbish. Except for a broken bar. He thumbed through the book, finding the useful sections of the book already marked with velvet ribbons. Sifting through the rest of the pile, he found each book sporting a number of ribbons marking various passages. Well, the Dark Lord isn't sugarcoating the truth for you. He's never really been one for that, he murmured, almost to himself. Harry thumbed through the books disinterestedly. Severus skimmed the rest of the contents of the bookshelf. It contained excellent reference books on a variety of subjects, as well as the texts required by Hogwarts. He lifted a volume from the shelf. I wasn't aware you were taking arithmancy. Harry grimaced. I'm not. That's for brainy kids, like Hermione. Severus winced to hear his son so casually disparage his intelligence. I don't know why he got me those books. Ancient runes, too. Severus clenched his teeth on a sharp reprimand. They are very useful subjects, and quite interesting. Harry shrugged. Maybe, but I'm stuck in divination. There's no way I could catch up. Out of all of the subjects at Hogwarts, excepting history of magic, these two are the easiest to learn from books. It's not uncommon for students to study these subjects on their own, and reserve their time at Hogwarts for studying areas that require more time in practical application. You do not have to take a course to sit the OWL or NEWT exams. Harry examined the books with more interest. Really? I didn't know that. Severus sweetened the pot. Both of these are often useful in conjunction with other subjects. For example, learning the animagus transformation requires several arithmancy calculations. Harry looked up, his eyes brightening with excitement. If you devote yourself to your studies, the Dark Lord is more likely to send you back to Hogwarts. Studying these subjects can only benefit you. Knowledge is power. Harry laughed. And power corrupts. So study hard. Be evil. Severus blinked. What? Harry waved vaguely. Nothing. Muggle saying. Voldemort said the same thing to me, you know, he said, sobering. I hate letting him have his way. I sympathize, however. Let him win the inconsequential battles. Save your defiance for important matters. The boy heaved a sigh. I guess. I just don't want to get in the habit of obeying him. I know. Severus was frankly amazed that their civil conversation had lasted this long. Even after he had regained his memories and been able to think of Harry without being inflicted with a blinding migraine, he had thought the boy rather disrespectful and defiant. Perhaps the boy was desperate for any company that wasn't Voldemort. Whatever the reason, Severus decided to grab this chance and start building a less adversarial relationship with his son. He drew a second chair to the large desk, and opened the arithmancy book. We'll just work on a few of these equations together. Harry sat, eyeing the book apprehensively. Dipping his quill, he tentatively copied the equation, and worked it out. Severus watched quietly, enjoying the way that understanding dawned. The boy's quill scribbled faster as he gained confidence. Finally, he flipped to the back of the book, and smiled when he saw that his answer was correct. Harry sat back, obviously pleased with his efforts. I got it right. That wasn't so hard. He basked in his small triumph for a few moments, then forged ahead. 3 equations later, he ran into difficulties. Severus tapped one of the numbers. "You forgot to subtract." Gritham's theorem applies here. Severus scrawled GTPG 2 next to the equations. Harry snatched his book away, looking irate. "You wrote in my book. You can't do that." Severus blinked in surprise, his quill still poised. Harry blotted at the ink futilely, looked almost frightened when scrawled note remained. Severus looked at the pristine condition of Harry's textbooks, some of which he knew were at least 4 years old. This, more than the state of Harry's clothes or Voldemort's files, brought home the reality of his son's upbringing. Severus too had often done without new clothes, and had worked at chores beneath most purebloods. But he had never lacked for books. "Harry, these are your books. You can write in them all you like. In fact, I recommend it." Severus snagged another book from the shelf and wrote, "Property of HJP and Great," swooping letters inside the cover. Harry looked at the inscription. "Buta broken bar Madam Pincia broken bar," he protested weakly. "If you scribble in a library book, then you deserve whatever punishment she dishes out," Severus said firmly. He certainly didn't want Harry to become a book vandal, but you may do what you like with your own books. Severus rose to his feet. "It's late. You should get some sleep, study hard, and think on what we've discussed." Harry nodded distractedly, still staring at his now less than pristine book. Severus gave in to temptation, briefly resting his hand on the boy's bowed head. Harry looked up, startled, and gave him a brave smile. "Yes, sir, thanks for a broken bar for looking out for me." Chapter 9 Update at Hogwarts. Severus debated briefly with himself before requesting the house elf show him to his rooms. He thought of returning to Hogwarts, but even with potions to brew and a school year to prepare for, it was a bit soon. He scanned the suite he had not entered for more than a decade. Personal treasures and valuable books, things he thought had been destroyed, had been waiting here all this time. He opened the drawer of the bedside table. Tucked inside were 2 small photos in ornate frames. Harry's baby picture. He'd been scarcely an hour old. Severus had never seen a child so young, and had found the baby's red, slightly squashed face somewhat alarming. The child in the picture was far from calm. Instead, he squirmed, his small, rather ugly, if Severus was honest, face scrunched in a discontented expression. Severus carefully set the picture aside, and picked up the second. Lily, his half-sister, during her first year at Hogwarts. The girl nervously adjusted her Gryffindor tie, smoothed her hair, then flashed a dazzling grin. He sighed, gently replacing the photos and closing the drawer. He'd spent hours looking at Lily's photo before he'd understood their relationship. He'd been convinced that his father would somehow give her to him, and they'd raise their son together. "Rather Tilda Macron V for a Death Eater, wasn't I?" He sneered at himself. Forcefully shoving the past aside, he dressed for bed. Tucked under pillows was a small sachet. He lifted it to his nose, smelling the familiar blend of lavender, chamomile, and other scents. Herbs for sweet dreams, he remembered. Though his mother had rarely been able to afford much beyond the basic necessities, she'd been an able gardener, and had sent him a fresh sachet every month until she'd passed away. He gently squeezed the sachet, eyes falling half-closed as he inhaled the familiar scent. He'd make one for Harry tomorrow, he decided. Severus trudged from the apparition point towards Hogwarts. He had rarely been so glad to see the old pile. It had been a long week. The Dark Lord had kept Harry confined to his room. Harry was sharp enough to know a gilded cage when he was in one. Severus' gentle attempts at legibility had caught impressions of a small, dark, musty space in the boy's thoughts. Harry had spent his time alternating between pacing and kicking the walls. He had tried throwing things, but almost everything in the room was immovable, and brief periods of intense focus, immersed in his studies. Voldemort, the cause of all this angst, was of course far too busy to deal with the results of his actions. So Severus had spent the last week trying to soothe the boy's frazzled nerves, or snapping at him to be still. The stress was adversely affecting the boy's sleeping and eating patterns, to the point he had gone a full 24 hours without either. Unlike most children his age, Harry was keenly aware of his own mortality. Gryffindors, he reflected wearily, are patently unsuited for enforcing action. Harry's etiquette instructor had arrived, so Voldemort had instructed a guiltily relieved Severus to resume his life at Hogwarts for a few days. He eased his guilt with the thought that he was bringing important information back to the Order. Dumbledore's door guardian leapt aside for him. and he swept up the stairs. Finding the door already open, Black was pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath, gesturing wildly, his face lighting up when he saw Severus, which was an unnerving experience, to say the least. "Please, come in, Severus." "Tea?" Albus asked. Severus accepted a cup, more from habit than from appetite. "How is Harry faring?" the old man asked after Severus had enjoyed a few sips of first cup of tea he'd been able to drink in peace for days. "He's better than we'd hoped. The Dark Lord isn't attempting any sort of torture or coercion, mental or physical. He has introduced the boy to the Death Eaters, so he is reasonably safe on that score. He has provided Harry with books and instructed him to study and complete his summer assignments. This could be a ploy to placate the boy, but there is a possibility he plans on returning him to Hogwarts." "Why in Merlin's name would he do that?" Remus asked. "What possible benefit could it hold for him?" Sirius sighed wearily. "It wouldn't cost him anything, Remus. Not with him as Lord and Harry as heir. We could keep Harry here, inside Hogwarts. Or we could take him to Grimmauld Place, or somewhere else under Fidelius. We could, Remus. And it wouldn't make a bit of difference. It's been tried before. It's impossible to hide heirs from their patrons, especially not a patron as powerful as Slytherin's." Black looked defeated. "I doubt any of that is necessary. By accepting Harry as his heir, he bound himself to protect him. He knows it would please Harry to return to Hogwarts, and as Black said, it would cost him very little. I have encouraged Harry to at least appear to cooperate." He sighed wearily. "And bringing Harry to and from Hogwarts would certainly be a potent demonstration of power." Black nodded. "Hell, we don't even have any legal right to interfere. All authority over an heir belongs to the lord of the family. And Tom Marvolo Riddle, Lord Slytherin, is certainly not a criminal, after all. I'm sure his record is squeaky clean," he said sarcastically. Albus nodded, uncharacteristically quiet. Though he was technically a pureblood, he and his family had always belonged to the middle class of the magical world. The nobility of the wizarding world enjoyed its privacy. It moved men and shaped policy behind the scenes. They did not commit their traditions and beliefs to parchment. Therefore, despite his immense personal power and knowledge, he had to rely on the very few nobles, like Severus and Sirius, who were willing to discuss their heritage in any sort of detail. And even these two, loyal as they were reticent. He sighed and shook his head. It hadn't even occurred to him that Tom could become young Harry's legal guardian, as well as magical. "Thomas Marvolo, now," Severus murmured. "He's refused to be Riddle since he killed his father and paternal grandparents." He looked pensive for a moment, then shook his head. "That's neither here nor there, for the moment. Have Amelia Bones keep a sharp eye out for Pettigrew." Harry and Voldemort struck a deal. Severus allowed himself a moment of petty satisfaction at the sick look on Black's face. "Deal?" he said hoarsely. "What sort of deal?" Even Albus looked alarmed. "The brat would probably sell his soul to protect the mutt," Severus reflected sourly, ignoring a feeling that closely resembled envy coiling in his gut. Apparently the Dark Lord wanted Harry to dress and behave appropriately at his little coming-out party, and that was the price they agreed upon. "Very Slytherin of Harry," Lupin murmured admiringly. "I don't want him to be Slytherin for my sake, Remus." Black raged, his face agonized. "Gryffindor foolishness will not help him, Black, but Slytherin cunning will serve him well. As long as the Dark Lord has you to negotiate over, he may not try something more direct, like kidnapping Granger or Weasley." "Severus is right," Albus said. "Had Harry pledged something more substantial or dangerous to him, there would be cause for alarm. As it stands, he has made an opportunity for us that we would otherwise lack. I will inform Amelia." "Severus, do you have anything else to report?" Severus listed the new Death Eaters, describing the gifts that the Dark Lord and his heir had received. "Damn," Black said, shaking his head. "Old man Gillette might just hang himself. You could buy diagonally with that violin." "Indeed, I fear young Gillette has not made the impression he'd hoped," Severus agreed. "The Dark Lord has also found someone to instruct Harry in etiquette, and I believe that he will be inviting some of his followers' children to the estate in order for Harry to have appropriate companions." Albus nodded, looking a bit cheerier than he had since Harry had been taken. "We'll leave things as they are, for now. We do not want to force Voldemort's hand."